So back to Rousseau, where we are looking at his life and his the ones he influenced and what he was influenced by. So this video, I'm going to talk a bit about the context in which Rousseau's thought was born. So uh, I'm sure you're all aware of, the idea of the Enlightenment. Now, this is kind of periodization that we do, and those of you who have studied literature or philosophy or history, you would be aware of this, is the way we periodize, European history and put them into different sort of categories, which are not very, very clear-cut categories. Well, for obvious reasons that, at what point do you say, okay, we stop with Renaissance and we start with the next stage or whatever, we stop with Enlightenment and then we get to Romanticism. What is here? Sometimes you name an event, so you say, okay, French Revolution, that was, now Romanticism has begun, but it's not very clear cut, as you can imagine. If you try to periodization is not very easy. But anyway, so Rousseau is counted as an Enlightenment philosopher and like a huge influence on Romanticism. So what is Enlightenment? The difficult question. So the idea comes from this French word, les lumières, light, right? Lights. So this was the idea of well, it sort of emerged really from Renaissance humanism, and which really sort of decentered God in some ways and brought into center the human and human concerns. It's a very sort of basic definition, reductive definition as well. But anyway, this is sort of like more or less the basic idea of what was happening. And I mean, like if I start doing a regress, we'd keep going backwards, and then we'd start talking about the Crusades and the Baroque, and like anyway. So let's start with this. So you had a couple of things happening around that time. So we're looking at 16th century. So you had Renaissance humanism, and you had the scientific revolution, which was let's say inaugurated by Copernicus's sort of heliocentric, return to a heliocentric model, and Galileo's taking it forward, and the kind of decentering that somebody like Descartes did. Cogito ergo sum, like I think, I'm thinking, therefore, I exist, I am. And the sort of, mathematical scientific work done by Leibniz and then Newton and Bacon, Bacon especially important because this was the rise of, empiricism really. And a kind of turn towards science and technological development and scientific development as what would lead to the salvation of humankind. So we are moving away from a very sort of traditional theological religion, like in which, I mean, the salvation of human beings would be God, but here, we are moving towards this idea of salvation of human beings will come from human invention, from human art, from techne, right? So that's what we're looking at with sort of this period right before the Enlightenment, and from which we would say Enlightenment emerged. You also had, as I've put on the slide, you had the social contract theories and natural law theorists, which again, these are all classical ideas, which again gained prominence, let's say, during this time. So you have Grotius, Hobbes, Locke. So they're bringing up, they're again, this is the centering of human beings, especially man, So the centering of human beings and the decentering of God in some ways. And so this is a move away from religion, from traditional philosophy, towards a more sort of, a turn towards science. Turn to science is what we would best describe this sort of movement. So from this emerged this age of reason, light, this idea of you coming out of the dark ages towards light. Again, very reductionist idea, but this is how people in that time thought of themselves. Modern time, the time of science, is the time of like enlightenment. It's a time of emerging into a new light, a new era of reason, where reason dominates, and we are getting rid of like irrational beliefs and ideas, and all kinds of things, right? So the concerns of the age then, some of the major concerns were epistemology. So the idea of where does knowledge come from? How do we know anything? How do we know that we know something, right? So does knowledge come from experience, from experiments? Are we a tabula rasa? Are we like a blank slate? And whatever experience we have is what builds ideas, or do we come with some pre-programmed thoughts and ideas? And so you had, that's why you had an empiricist strand and a rationalist strand. Again, reductionist, but yeah, these two strands, in which they were thinking about, what is it to know? They were also trying to think about what is a scientific method? How do we know that what we know has any, substance? Right? How do we prove that our knowledge is real? So again, this sort of these were the concerns, and on the other side, on the political front, one of the major concerns was the concern of individual liberty, and that's why natural law, by nature, what 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 rights do we have as human beings, that come from nature? And this is again, a revival of classical sort of questions that were asked, during the times from the pre-Socratic onwards. At least we have that what are we by nature? And if we are, like, imagine, by then, like, a lot of our rights don't come, not necessarily from nature, but they are prescribed to us from like the state, from the church, from all kinds of things, which in which we are bound in some ways. But as human beings, do we have certain rights? So the question of individual liberty became like a pretty big question, and that's why it is one of the precursors, really, like, to liberalism. The next period after, if we are doing the periodization, from Enlightenment, we would have liberalism arising. And so the thinkers that we are looking at, they are also the precursors to liberalism. So Rousseau, for example, Montesquieu, Rousseau, Voltaire, they are all sort of counted as precursors to liberalism. So individual liberty, as defined against, collective duties, rights that, I mean, duties that are demanded of us by the collective, and, what place individual liberties. This became a question. Then the question of religious freedom, religious tolerance, so both of them go together. So if we are free in our mind to think what we want and believe what we want, then there needs to be some kind of religious freedom to practice whichever form of religion we want. So this was again, one of the concerns of the age. And so these people met together in these literary salons, which were run by aristocratic sort of households, where they collected the sort of thinkers, the philosophers, the people who spoke well, these well-heeled young men mostly, to come together and discuss and entertain the lords and ladies, or rather, the aristocratic men and women of that milieu. So literary salons were one place that they met together. Then they met in coffee houses, which was another thing, which was another public space for discussion, though that took off later, I would say. Not we are a bit early right now for that. And pamphlets, a lot of distribution of pamphlets, sort of, it had already started earlier. So, Milton was a big pamphleteer. A distribution of pamphlets and the publications of books, the distribution of books improved. That way, a lot of people could read books written far away, and there was much more production of this. So these were the spaces for discussion, and that's how they got to know each other's ideas and started discussing. And that's where philosophy sort of comes from, right? People discuss, people argue, people debate, and get into proper fights with each other, right? So in the previous video, I already talked about the encyclopedist. So that was Diderot and D'Alembert who started this. And he got people to write there. So Voltaire, Holbach, Montesquieu, Rousseau. And they did not always agree with each other, but this was, again, one big sort of like, this was a group that was formed, and Rousseau was part of this group. And that's why I'm, bringing it forward, because Rousseau, being different in many ways from all the others, all the other encyclopedists, he nevertheless formed part of this, though he wrote his, I think most of his things he wrote in the encyclopedia is on music. But yeah, so he was part of this group. um, and I have brought up this Kant, who came after, right? So this is Kant is, later. So he's looking back, and he's trying to answer the question, what is enlightenment? And I'll share the text with you as well for the Kant reading. Though not prescribed reading, but it'll be great if you read it. It's very short, in which he summarizes it really with these two words, sapere aude, right? De aude, to know, right? So this idea of enlightenment is, to sort of, speak for yourself. The word he uses there is Mündigkeit, right? So to be able to speak with your mouth, like have your own voice, dare to know, and don't keep depending on other people to tell you what to do, and don't keep depending on other people to have like all the answers for you. So this is what, like he describes the enlightenment as, and this is what, was so important to the philosophers, thinkers, writers, like artists of that time. Yeah. So, as I said, Rousseau's Interlocutors were the encyclopedists. So this picture that you see, it's, I think, one of these dinner parties at Voltaire's house. I think that's Voltaire there. And I don't know if Rousseau is in the group, probably is, but yeah, they all look the same, really. Sorry, you can figure it out. But yeah, anyway, so they had these discussions, like they didn't all agree with each other. So there were some people who were like for liberal constitutionalism. There were some for enlightened monarchy. There were many actually who were, diehard sort of deists, and then there were others who were like, no, atheism, right? So Diderot, for example. Then but they all, I think, one of the things that they insisted upon was this idea of individual conscious freedom of thought. Then there was again, like a lot of demand for religious tolerance, and what I've called radical naturalism, though that's a weird idea anyway. So people like Baron de Holbach, who would be like a proper sort of determinist, really, that we are just parts of nature, we don't have any free will, nothing, right? So yeah, so you had amongst the encyclopedists, these were the discussions that were going on. If you're interested, do look it up, and I can share more text with you as well, so we'll discuss that in class. And then you have natural law theorists, whom we have already talked about, where you had debates about human nature, the origin of political institutions, and these were important discussions. And as you'll see in Rousseau's text that we'll discuss, this is the center really of the whole text. What is it to be human, really? That's the center of that text. And of course, there were political economists, so Adam Smith, for example. And that's why I said precursors to liberalism, this time. Then you have, as I said, that and the Baconians, of course. So I've already talked enough about that, so I won't go back into it. But the idea of science as the salvation of mankind, turn towards science, return towards science. So that's that's what is going on in this time. Right. So yeah, no, before we go to discussing Rousseau in particular, so I'll basically stop the video here. Is there anything else I want to talk about? Because then we'll talk about Rousseau per se. So yeah, so as I said earlier, that he was Genevan, and the Genevan sort of like city and constitution had like a very, very strong influence on him, because it was a sort of, well, it was not exactly like an ancient republic, but it was a republic, and they tried to build it on the model of the ancient republic. It was breaking down by Rousseau's time, where they had they had different councils. So they had like a general assembly, which constituted the male adult citizens above the age of 25 or something. And but not all of them, of course, so to become a citizen, there were a lot of things that you had to do. So I think the majority of the population was not a citizen, right? Most people working there were not citizens, and of course they did not include women amongst this, but still they had a general council, and I would say there were about 1,500 people in there. Then you had like a sort of group of representatives or leaders. There were 200 of them, and from that you had also the archons, the top brass, which were 25 of them, which were the executive council. And so they had tried to incorporate the ideas of a republic, these are Roman ideas of the republic, into this post-medieval sort of city. And Geneva was not that big a city. I think it had a population maybe of like 25,000. But in that, they had a very good set of, sorry, a very good sort of, set of principles by which they tried to establish a republic. But of course, as with any such institution, a lot of it just became rubber stamping. So, the General Assembly did not have that many rights. They were supposed to be the legislative assembly, but eventually the executive started doing things. So it went towards more of an oligarchy, despotism. But yeah, so Rousseau was very proud of that. And, he cites that as his influence. And the text that we'll be reading, he the epistle dedicatory is to the Republic of Geneva, from which he was kicked out. I think by then, was he kicked out? Probably. But anyway, so he's like, this is my, patrie, my fatherland, and like, I pay my homage to it. I don't think his fatherland really appreciated the homage that much. But yeah, so this is also another very important sort of aspect of Rousseau. But yeah, again, I'll stop here because otherwise the videos can go on forever, because now I want to get into like properly discussing, the text. I mean, not in detail because that we'll do in our class, but just sort of giving you the outline of the text so that when we have our class, you will be all ready for it. All right, thank you.